it was quite clear that no one was to be spared in that village.
That day in my life, I was personally responsible for killing between 20 and 25 people, about 25 people, personally.
Like we used to have to run around yelling, kill, 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 just to get in our heads, just to get that feeling that you can do it.
Well, they figure that the babies, when they grow up, they will be VC anyway. So why give them an opportunity to grow up?
But your training didn't tell you to scalp people or to cut ears?
No.
They seem to have no understanding of life. They don't care whether they live or die.
This is what the war in Vietnam is all about.
In the early morning hours of March 16, 1968, C Company of 1st Battalion, attached to the 23rd Infantry Division, would set out to commit the worst war crime in United States history at the village of My Lai. There, C Company would begin the wholesale murder of hundreds of unarmed civilians, the horrors of which could only be understood by those who witnessed it. One of those who did witness this atrocity was a warrant officer, Hugh Thompson Jr., a Huey gunship pilot. Having seen the massacre, was so sickened by the actions of his fellow soldiers, abandoned his mission and landed in the middle of the massacre to prevent any more killing, even ordering his own door gunners to open fire on US troops. What followed was a moment of incredible bravery and dignity in a storm of degeneracy and evil, with a level of scandal that would haunt Hugh and his crew for the rest of the war and, sadly, the rest of their lives. This is the story of the My Lai Massacre and the men who stopped it. Hugh Thompson Jr. and his crew, Crew Chief Glenn Andreatta and door gunner Lawrence Colburn, were part of the 123rd Aviation Battalion, attached to support the 23rd Infantry Division. There, they would fly a handful of missions prior to that fateful day and gain some combat experience supporting other elements of the 23rd Infantry Division. However, this would draw a stark contrast to the company involved in the massacre. The soldiers comprising C Company were in large part made up of green recruits or replacements on their first deployment to Vietnam, having little to no combat experience. Many of the soldiers that were there that day say that this played a pivotal role in the actions of the soldiers at My Lai.
Like we used to have to run around yelling, kill, 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 just to get in our heads, just to get that feeling that you can do it.
C Company had some experience with the Viet Cong, though not much and certainly not in direct action, as the company would spend its first 3 months on deployment in relative peace. The men of C Company would soon learn about the VC's tactics, however, sustaining around 28 casualties while on patrol in the areas surrounding My Lai. Mostly due to landmines and booby traps, the company had no idea what the enemy looked like or what they were in for in the following days.
It was mostly through booby traps and snipers. We never really got into a main conflict per se where you could see who was shooting at you and you could actually shoot back at them one-on-one. Booby traps was the main problem.
Leading up to March 16th, the Vietnamese countryside had been shaken by the Tet Offensive, a large-scale guerrilla operation to attack every major U.S. installation in South Vietnam, beginning in January of that year. The Tet Offensive was the largest offensive to date in the war and saw heavy fighting across the entirety of South Vietnam, from Khe Sanh in the north to Saigon in the south, something that proved to be somewhat of a loss in a military context, but was a major slap in the face to both the U.S. Army and also to the people of America back home, due in part to William Westmoreland making confident and repeated claims that South Vietnam was under complete dominance by the U.S.
By North Vietnam, he has nothing to show for his investment. He has not won a single significant victory in the South during the last 1.5 years.
So to the American populace, these attacks and bold claims were seen as an insult on both their eyes and their intelligence. The Tet Offensive would light a fire inside of the DoD and ARVN headquarters, demanding success in a counteroffensive by any means necessary, believing that if they didn't bring home a win, then the war would be surely lost. One of the targets of the Tet Offensive was the Quang Ngai province, a location of several attacks carried out by the VC 48th Local Force Battalion in the outbreak of the Tet Offensive. U.S. intelligence estimated that the 48th had disengaged and retreated to the village of Sun Mi to reorganize. In order to slow down the offensive and gain some control of South Vietnam, MAC-V aggressively pursued search and destroy operations to gain the initiative back. Task Force Baker, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Frank Baker, would set his eyes on the 48th and draft an operation to hunt them down and destroy them at the Sun Mi village. Baker would pull 3 rifle companies from the 11th Brigade for this mission, which included C Company. Colonel O. Ron Henderson, the 11th Brigade commander, would encourage Baker and his officers to, quote, go in there aggressively, close with the enemy, and wipe them out for good. Baker would take this order to his officers and reportedly order them to, quote, burn down hamlets, kill livestock, poison wells, and destroy food supplies. The C Company commander, Captain Ernst Medina, was reported to have made some bizarre and outright disturbing comments during their briefing. Several platoon leaders as well as regular enlisted men had differing accounts of what was exactly said, but the sentiment seemed to be the same. As the men of C Company understood it, according to what Captain Medina briefed them on, was the following, quote, we were to kill all VC and NVA combatants and suspects, which included women, children, and animals, burn the village and pollute the wells.
It was quite clear that no one was to be spared in that village.
Without any doubt, there wasn't anything else that the men could have picked up from it. Everybody had the same idea. They got the same impression from it. You know, this is going to be a free-for-all. You can shoot anything you want, anything that moves, as long as he's not one of your own.
The implication was just to get rid of everybody.
Captain Medina justified this by alleging that after 7 a.m., all the villagers would have gone to the market, therefore the only ones left would, most likely, be VC or VC sympathizers. Medina was quoted by a soldier to have said, quote, they are all VC, now go out there and get them. When Medina was asked, who is my enemy? Medina would reply, anybody that was running from us, hiding from us, or appeared to be the enemy. If a man was running, shoot him. Sometimes even if a woman with a rifle was running, shoot her. Now this brief and the quotes made by Medina would be attributed to the murders committed by C Company, as the soldiers would routinely claim that they were just following orders. However, even with such crude briefing as that was, and the inexperience of the C Company soldiers, it still certainly did not line up with what was actually committed that day.
When the time of the operation, that there wasn't going to be any villagers in the area that were innocent, you know, that they were going to go to the market or go out in the fields. You know, the people that should be working, that work every day, are going to be out in the fields. The people that go to the market are going to be in the market. And if there's any VC in there, they're going to be there then.
On March 16, 1968, at 7 a.m., Charlie Company would disembark on helicopters following a brief artillery and gunship barrage on the surrounding areas near Sun Mi. Their target was the largest collection of hamlets named My Lai. For most there, this would be their first engagement with the enemy, and according to their briefing, they would be facing one of the Viet Cong's best units, the 48th Local Force, deeply entrenched inside of My Lai. Only one thing was for certain that day: these soldiers would kill. The question was, how many? At 7:30 a.m., the soldiers of C Company would land just outside of My Lai. Upon their dismount, they received no enemy fire.
Was anybody shooting back? I don't think so. I really don't.
In fact, they were met with a series of villagers tending to their rice field, and at a distance could make out elderly men cooking on open fires, prepping to go to the market, in complete contradiction to what Medina had briefed them on. The soldiers continued on, believing that the VC units must be hiding underground or in the hamlets themselves. Giving air to this suspicion was the fact that 3 or 4 actual VC troops were killed in the gunship attack prior, which were later identified and found with a weapon. By 8 a.m., 1st Platoon, led by 2nd Lieutenant William Calley, and 2nd Platoon, led by 2nd Lieutenant Stephen Brooks, entered the hamlet of Tu Kong, inside of My Lai. There, an unidentified machine gunner from 1st Platoon struck an elderly man with a bayonet, then pushed another villager into a well and dropped a grenade on him, killing him instantly. This would set off a deadly chain reaction. Rather than being removed or disciplined for this action, the soldier was ignored and the genocide would commence. Following this, 15 to 20 villagers, predominantly women and children, who were spotted praying and crying near a temple were executed with gunshots to the head. C Company began an indiscriminate mass execution of the villagers, the likes of which hasn't been seen since World War II when the Nazis invaded Poland. They began throwing grenades into hamlets, gunning down anything that was breathing. This included livestock, the elderly, women, and children, some of which were as young as 1 year old. In one particularly gruesome event, a soldier spotted a woman fleeing her hamlet to escape the onslaught, carrying her child. The soldier opened fire, killing the woman, only discovered that he hit both the mother and the child in her arms.
But she was carrying something. I didn't know if it was a weapon or what, but it was a woman. You know, I knew it was a woman. I didn't want to shoot a woman, you know, but I was given an order to shoot. So I'm thinking that she had a weapon running. So when I shot and I turned over, it was a baby. You know, shot about 4 times, 3 or 4 times. And the bullet just went through and shot the baby too, you know. And I turned over and I saw the baby face with her half gone. You know?
C Company would continue its rampage by rounding up 70 to 80 more villagers and death marching them to a ditch just south of the village. There, 2nd Lieutenant Calley would make repeated orders to have the detainees shot and killed. Even after numerous pleas by the villagers, using what little English they knew, they only replied with "No VC" while shielding their children. This did not stop them, sadly, as Calley's orders trumped their pleas and the soldiers opened fire. Private First Class Dennis Conti would testify later that, quote, "A lot of women had thrown themselves on top of the children to protect them, and the children were alive at first. Then, the children who were old enough to walk got up, and Calley began to shoot the children. Unfortunately, this was just the beginning, as after the initial attack, U.S. troops would do a more thorough sweep where the soldiers would sink deeper into depravity. Private First Class Michael Bernhardt would recount, quote, that soldiers would do strange things like setting hooches on fire and wait to shoot the ones who came out, then go inside and shoot the ones that remained. In one instance, he recounted that a large group of villagers were gathered and then fired on by an M79 grenade launcher, killing everyone in the group. Private First Class Bernhardt would say that the village was like any other, and quote, as a matter of fact, I don't remember seeing one military-aged male in the entire place, dead or alive.
Estimate that you saw murdered with your own eyes. I saw approximately 20 people in a group killed. There were more, of course. I couldn't really say exactly how many. I saw at least 100 dead who were killed, I presume, in the same way that I saw the first group killed.
Disgusted and horrified by this atrocity, a handful of soldiers flat out refused to participate in the killings, one going as far to shoot himself in the foot with his own pistol to avoid involvement. Not everyone in C Company was involved in the massacre, but many would quietly turn a blind eye and not protest or prevent any other killings once it started.
Lieutenant Calley ordered certain people to shoot these people, and I was one of them, and I refused. Ordering me to shoot down innocent people, that's not an order. That's craziness to me, you know? And so I don't feel like I have to obey that.
While the massacre continued, a helicopter pilot would land in the middle of the killing, requesting to help the wounded civilians, who would later be identified as none other than Hugh Thompson Jr. and his crew. Hugh and his crew would land a few yards away from the ditch that over 70 civilians had been executed in. His request to help the survivors was rejected by 2nd Lieutenant Calley, who later admitted that he replied to Hugh by saying, quote, the only thing that will help them evacuate is a hand grenade, implying that killing them was easier to end their misery than saving them. To Hugh's horror and confusion, he witnessed Sergeant David Mitchell begin firing into the ditch to finish off the survivors, not before Calley would remark that they were just following orders. Hugh, now bewildered by the situation, again witnessed Medina punch and kick a woman before executing her at point-blank range with a gunshot to the head. Medina would later report he believed that she was wielding a grenade and was poised to use it had he not shot her. Hugh would continue to survey the area from the sky, where you would notice 12 to 16 villagers hiding in a small bunker that was being approached by US troops. Sick of the massacre he was seeing unfold, landed between the villagers and the soldiers, blocking them from their murderous intent. He would order his door gunner to open fire on any US troops attempting to shoot any more of the villagers he was trying to rescue. Hugh, against the great evil he was seeing, stood up against his own troops and began coaxing the traumatized villagers out from the bunker to safety. Hugh and his crew would make 2 trips to ensure that all survivors he found would survive, which they did. On the return trip back to My Lai, he would see another large group of dead villagers. He would divert, landing near the pile of bodies where Specialist 4 Glenn Andreatta would leave the helicopter and recover a bloodied but unharmed 4-year-old girl who would also be rescued that day. The helicopter crew would lift off and return to base and report what they had witnessed. Sadly, during the massacre, a number of women and young girls, some as young as 9 years old, were forced into sexual acts, the details of which I will spare you as they are far too graphic and disturbing. However, 20 women would be officially reported to have been assaulted by US troops, but it is believed that many more were also assaulted, just not reported or known about. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is probably the most graphic part of this entire story. So if you are uncomfortable hearing this, skip ahead. In the most sickening case, a woman was gang assaulted after having just witnessed her children be murdered in front of her, which is a level of evil I don't even think Satan himself would be proud of.
He's a fucking human being, man! Fuck you! Full of fucking cherry, Taylor. Fucking animal! All of you, you fucking animals!
By 11 a.m., the troops of C Company had gone on a rampage for over 3 hours, before callously and coldly taking a lunch break, eating lunch around the razed village and mutilated bodies of the villagers they had just killed.
So we landed the aircraft next to the ditch, and we got out of it, and my gunner, stood on one side of the aircraft, and I stood on the other. Andrada went down wading, through the bodies, and brought back up, a little child about 3 years old. It was obvious how the people got in the ditch by then, I guess. So we got the child on board, and we were, getting that child out of there. It still hurts to think about us doing things like that.
Upon Hugh's return, he would immediately report what he witnessed at My Lai to his senior command, in the hopes that those who committed this atrocity would be punished. To Hugh's surprise, however, quite the opposite happened. An official investigation was closed. C Company would be hailed as heroes and victors over their enemy, concluding the operation with over 100 enemy VC killed, minimum civilian casualties, and only 1 American wounded, marking it as a decisive victory against the Viet Cong. This narrative would be pushed heavily by both the military and the president, in the hopes that the world would forget what happened at My Lai. However, Hugh and many others would come forward to express their experiences on that day. Several more investigations were launched, and a legitimate trial was held. During this trial from July of 1969 to September of that year, 25 officers and soldiers of C Company were indicted for their actions at My Lai. However, only 2 officers were ever actually charged. Major General Coster, who initially was charged, but somehow, some way, was acquitted of all charges brought against him. The second officer was Lieutenant Calley, who was charged with over 20 murders and sentenced to life in prison. But before he could see any punishment for his crimes, President Nixon stepped in just before Calley would be sent to prison and lowered his sentence from life to 3 years house arrest, meaning Calley only spent around 2 days in a military prison and an additional 3 years house arrest for being found guilty of murdering over 20 innocent people. And according to Hugh and others who were there that day, Calley killed far more than just the 20 that he was charged with. No others involved that day were ever charged or faced any real punishment beyond demotions and medal removals. After Hugh Thompson Jr. reported what he experienced at My Lai, he was initially rewarded for his actions that day. He was rewarded with the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions and bravery on the My Lai operation. However, Hugh would renounce his reward and throw the medal away after discovering the citation given for the medal was fabricated, containing stories and accounts that did not happen. The citation claimed that Hugh saved a small boy and brought him to the hospital while doing so under intense enemy fire, and that Hugh's judgment and observation improved the Vietnamese and American relationship. Hugh would reportedly explain his account at My Lai to numerous officers and investigators. In one instance, Hugh was speaking before Congress, and one congressman, Mendel Rivers, would have marked that Hugh Thompson should be the only one in trouble for pointing a weapon at his own side and not the enemy's.
Didn't want the story out.
No.
About the massacre at My Lai.
Well, not when one of the senior congressmen during these secret testimonies say if anybody goes to jail that day, it'll be that helicopter pilot.
Hugh and his crew members would recount times when they experienced complete alienation after he reported the My Lai incident. Hugh would explain that during his time in the military after his report, he would experience both death threats and receive dead animals at his door to intimidate him. While still in Vietnam, he would also notice that the typical security detail that would follow him on missions seemingly disappeared. He typically had 2 more Huey gunships alongside him on every mission previous to My Lai. Now, he had none, only a small recon plane with no armor or weapons to defend him, as they would continue flying missions with or without support.
You went to the officers' club and what'd they do?
Be 100 people in there after work. 5 minutes after I was there, it seemed like it was me and the bartender left.
You kept flying missions, correct?
Yes, sir. He was placed in a very precarious position as far as the missions that he was carrying out.
How do you mean?
Instead of being followed by 2 armed gunships, he had another scout helicopter.
However, during this time, Glenn Andreatta would pass away during a combat mission just a few weeks after My Lai. That being said, Colburn and Thompson would both retire from the military in the 1970s. Thompson retired due to him surviving 4 helicopter crashes and breaking his back on the last one, ending his career. And Colburn isn't officially stated as to why he left, but that he just did not re-enlist. After 30 years, Hugh Thompson Jr. and his crew would finally be officially and accurately recognized for their action at My Lai. Originally, only Hugh was approved to privately receive the Soldier's Medal, to which he refused, saying he would only accept any medals they offered if it was done publicly and that his crew, both living and dead, received the same medals. The Army reluctantly accepted. Thompson, Andreatta, and Colburn all received the Soldier's Medal, hailed as heroes and true American patriots for their actions against American troops in their massacre at My Lai. Though vindicating, it still deeply bothered Thompson and Colburn that no one was ever punished for their crimes, and the scars and traumas they received after that day haunted them until their death. Both Thompson and Colburn would return to the village in 1998 to pay their respects to the innocents who died, apologizing for the actions of his brothers in arms, and laying incense down at the memorial site for the victims killed in the ditch that day. Hugh Thompson Jr. would pass away at the age of 62 on January 6, 2006, after a long battle with cancer. He was buried with full military honors, including a 3-volley salute and a helicopter flyover. Lawrence Colburn would pass away at age 67 on December 13, 2016, also with full military honors after again a long battle with cancer. Glenn Andreatta would unfortunately be killed on April 11, 1968, after supporting 2 gunships at an operation in the Quang Ngai province, the same province that the massacre he witnessed took place just a month prior. There, Andreatta would be killed instantly after receiving Vietnamese small arms fire, where Andreatta was struck in the head. Unfortunately, his helicopter would be shot down, killing 1 more crew member and launching the 3rd from the impact, saving him. Andreatta would posthumously be awarded the Bronze Star for his actions, and 30 years later would also be awarded the Soldier's Medal. May these men rest in peace, and I will end on a fitting quote: "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing."